So I am, with no further ado, Van Pearlberg.
Move this podium.
Yes, please.
The only correction I'm going to make of Jan's speech was I was never a district attorney. I went from assistant DA to a senior assistant DA to deputy chief assistant DA. And that's what I retired with, now with the Attorney General staff. First of all, let me say thank you to all the accountants for this evening's lecture. I am not an expert on the case. The dean of the case, or the dean, I should say, of the facts of the case, is really Bill Kinney. And Bill, I heard him give the speech about in the mid-'80s, and I became infatuated with the case. It fascinated me. And as a result, I've read everything there could be and is about the case. Basically, I am like the Cliff Notes version of the books. So that's what I'm going to do is as I go through the PowerPoint presentations, I will tell you basically what the books say. There are a lot of contradictions in the books, and I'll point them out to you as we go through the lecture. So without any further ado, let me see, am I in your way over here? Am I okay? All right. Mary Phagan, she was actually born in Florence, Alabama, but again, if you read the book, the Leo Frank case by Leonard Dinnerstein, it says she was born in Marietta, but actually it's in Alabama. She moved to Marietta at the age of 1. Her father died of measles, and as a result of dying of measles, her mother, Fanny Benton Phagan, moved back to Marietta. She moved to her parents' house, Durrell DeVeston Benton. They actually lived, the closest I could figure is somewhere around where Williams and Brothers Barbecue is on Roswell Road. Somewhere in that vicinity is where the maternal grandparents lived. She married a man by the name of Coleman. Now, Mr. Coleman, again, depending upon the book you read, when they moved to the Bellwood section of Atlanta, which is south of Georgia Tech, he either worked in the cotton mills as a lint head, they referred to him as, or he was in the sanitation business. So again, there's a contradiction. At the age of 10 years of age, Mary Phagan went to work at the National Pencil Factory, and she made 10 cents an hour. That was after she worked there for 3 years. The National Pencil Factory was in South Forsyth Street and Hunter Street, which is now the Sam Nunn Federal Center. She was going to the pencil factory on April 26, 1913. It was Confederate Memorial Day. Her plan was she was going to go to the pencil factory and get her $1.20 in pay from her previous weeks of 12 hours that she worked, and then attend the parade. She was wearing gunmetal colored shoes. She had on black stockings, a lavender dress, a hat with ribbons and bows and flowers, and she had a silver mesh purse that she kept with her. The last she did, she went to get paid. That was the last time she was alive because she was murdered that night. They found her body in the early morning hours of April 27th in the basement of the pencil factory. She had a hole in the side of her head. She had a rope around her neck. She had cinders in her mouth, cinders in her nose. There was blood and urine on her clothing. Her tongue was protruding. And again, according to another book, she also had one tooth knocked out. Next slide.
You want to do it for yourself?
Oh, you want me? I got to work? Goodness. Hold on a minute. Don't go anywhere.
I'm not going anywhere.
It's not working.
The one to point towards here to the left.
Still not working.
Wow, I did my magic.
Anyway, magic. All right, Leo Frank. Leo was born in Paris, Texas, or another book says Cairo, C-U-E-R-O, Texas. He was born in Texas, but at a very young age, his parents moved to Brooklyn, New York. His father was actually a physician in Dusseldorf, Germany. But again, depending upon the book you read, when they got here, some books say he was a postman, some books say he was disabled to railway worker. He went to Connolly University and obtained a degree in mechanical engineering. And he went to the National Pencil Factory actually in 1907. Before he went there, at the request of his uncle Moses Frank, who was the superintendent there, he worked actually in an apprenticeship in Germany at the Eberhard Faber pencil factory over there for a number of months to learn the business. In 1910, actually November 30th, 1910, he married Lucille Selig of the very prominent Selig family in Atlanta. He was arrested for the murder of Mary Phagan on the 27th of 1913. He referred to himself as the silent man of the tower. Unlike today where people give interviews and go on television, give stories about the case, he took the position, this is not the time, this is not the place. When I go to court, that's when I'll talk. So they referred to him as the silent man of the tower. He was convicted of the murder. After the jury found him actually guilty of murder, and he himself was murdered in 1915 by a form of lynching.
So you guys can try one more time. Let's see if you can.
Let me try it all by myself.
Oh, too far. Go back to the right. Light hand. Telling you technology, right?
Okay, now, the facts of the case. Hold on a minute. Make sure that was the right slide. Okay. Facts of the case. She went to get $1.20 in pay. Leo Frank said that he saw her between 12:05 and 12:10. He locked himself into that time. And Lemmy Quinn, who was also a worker at the pencil factory, said he came up there between 12:15 and 12:20, and he saw Leo Frank sitting at his desk. Montine Stover, who was a young female worker there at the pencil factory, she came up there at the same time, or not the same time as Lemmy Quinn, but 12:15, 12:20. She said he wasn't there. And that was a very big factor to the police, that he was not sitting at his desk according to Montine Stover, even though Lemmy Quinn said he was there. After he paid her the $1.20, she asked if the medal had come in. The reason she hadn't worked that week, or only 12 hours that week, previous to this, was because the medal had run out. She worked what was called the knurling machine. That put the metal tip on the end of the pencil that the eraser goes in. So she wanted to know if the metal had come in. So they walked down to the lathe room, which is on the second floor of the pencil factory. They saw that there was no metal there. That was the last time Leo Frank saw her. He heard some commotion afterwards, but when he turned around, he saw Harry Denham and Arthur White fixing the plank floor in the pencil factory, so he figured that was the noise that he heard. When he left the pencil factory, sometime around 1:10 that afternoon, he ran into Jim Gant. Jim Gant was a bookkeeper that Leo Frank had fired. And he was outside the pencil factory because he wanted to get a pair of shoes that he left in the factory. Leo also ran into Ethel Miller and Maya Efkoff, and they talked about things like the B'nai B'rith that Leo was president of. They talked about the temple, things of that nature. He was supposed to go to a baseball game that day. He was supposed to go see the Atlanta Crackers versus the Birmingham Barons with his brother-in-law, Charles Ursenbach. He was supposed to go at 4 o'clock. But it was a dreary day, he had paperwork to do, he decided he wasn't going to go. So when Newt Lee, the night watchman, came in at 4 o'clock so Leo Frank could go to the ball game, Leo Frank said, you know what, go away, come back at your regular time of 6 o'clock because I'm not going to the ball game. Well, Newt Lee is the one who found the body of Mary Phagan. At 7 o'clock that night, Leo Frank called the pencil factory and just said, is everything all right? The police were fascinated with that phone call because although Newt Lee had worked there for 3 weeks, Leo Frank had never called before to find out, is everything all right? At 3 o'clock in the morning, Newt Lee goes to the basement to use the restroom. He finds the body. He doesn't even know what race the body is because she's so covered in cinders and grime from the basement. He calls the police. The police call Leo Frank at 3 o'clock in the morning. He doesn't answer the phone. Finally, at 7 o'clock in the morning, he answers the phone and his first response is, has there been a fire? When they asked him about how come he didn't answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning, he says, you know, I was dreaming that the phone was ringing, but I just thought it was a dream. So I didn't pick up the phone. When the police got there and they found the body, they had Grace Hicks, who worked there and was the niece of Boots Rogers, who was a police officer. They had her come and identify the body as Mary Phagan. When Leo came and identified the body, or to identify the body, first he said, no, I don't know who she is. Then he remembered that she was the girl that he had paid earlier that day. And they found some notes. They found notes next to the body. This is what happens when you can't sleep at night. Watch this. In fact, there you go. Look at that. Magic. Anyway, they found these notes next to the body. He said he would love me, land down, play the night witch. Remember that term, night witch? Did it, but that long, tall Negro did by himself. The second note said, man, that Negro hired down here did this. I went to make water and he pushed me down that hole. A long, tall Negro, black, that's who it was. Long, slim, tall Negro. I write while he played with me. Now, two things I want you to remember. The phrase night witch, and over here, the Negro hired down here. Both gentlemen, this fit the description of two people. Newt Lee, who was a tall, slender African-American man, who was the night watchman. And then there was also a person by the name of William Knoll, who was the fireplace or furnace stoker. He worked down there. And these notes fit the description of both these men. Now, during this period of time, you got to remember, this is 1913. The Civil War had only ended a number of years earlier, and there was still a lot of prejudice, and again, there was tremendous pretrial publicity. Robert House was a special officer for the Druid Hills Housing Authority. When Leo Frank was arrested, Robert House came out and said he recalled Leo Frank because he had arrested him a year earlier with a young girl in the woods. Well, that hit the paper. After it hit the paper, Mr. House said, you know what? I made a mistake. It wasn't Leo Frank. Nina Formby ran a boarding house, or some books refer to it as a brothel. She claimed that Leo Frank called her on the day of April 26, 1913, and said, I need a room for myself and a young girl. Afterwards, she said that the only reason she said that was because two detectives, Detective Chorning and Detective Morris, plied her with alcohol and said that they weren't going to give her a license to run the boarding house. Manola McKnight was the cook housekeeper for the Selig family, which was Leo Frank's in-laws. She was also the cook housekeeper for the Frank family because Leo Frank and his wife Lucille lived with his in-laws at 68 East Georgia Avenue in Atlanta. Manola McKnight was taken into custody by the police. While she was in custody, she gave an affidavit that she said that she overheard Mrs. Frank, Leo's wife, Lucille, tell her mother that Leo was drunk the night before, that Leo confessed to the crime, that Leo wanted to shoot himself and didn't know why he did it. When she was released from custody, she said, I recant the whole thing. I only said that because I wanted to get out of custody, and I didn't want, but it's a complete lie. But during the trial, they used that statement that she had given. Albert McKnight was the husband of Manola McKnight. He came up with a statement that said that on the day of April 26th, Leo came home about 1 o'clock. Now you remember he ran into Jim Gann, Ethel Miller, and Maya Lefkosh at 1:10. But he's saying that Leo came home about 1 o'clock, 1:30 in that vicinity, didn't eat, and then he came up with a story that he had overheard Leo and Lucille having an argument, and that he heard Lucille say, why don't you kiss me goodbye? And Leo made a comment to the effect, I'm saving my kisses for somebody. Afterwards, also the reason for the star is because he worked for a company called Beck and Gregg, and he was trying to get the reward of, depending upon which book, either $4,300 or $3,400. After the trial, though, he said everything I said in this case was a complete lie. Dewey Ewell was a young girl. She was at the home of unwed mothers in Cincinnati, Ohio. The newspaper blasted that Dewey Ewell was coming back to testify. Why? Who knew? But they said she was coming back to testify. Luther Bricker was the pastor of Mary Phagan's church. Luther Bricker basically said that the arrest of an old Negro was not a good atonement for the life of Mary Phagan. However, when they arrested a Jew, and a Yankee Jew at that, all the prejudices that he had against the Jew came out. So that was his statement about Leo Frank. There was also a detective for the Pinkerton Detective Agency who said that unless a Jew is convicted, they're going to have to leave town. Mr. Henley is an interesting character. Mr. Henley was a juror, and he was also the only person to vote not guilty the first time there was a vote. He was a holdout. The vote was 11-1, and he was the holdout. However, in 1982, the Tennessean, the newspaper up in Tennessee, they did an article on the Leo Frank case. And they claimed that Mr. Henley had made remarks prior to being put on the jury that Leo Frank was a goddamn Jew and should have his neck broken. Of course, there was affidavits that it was taken out of context, and he never said anything to that nature. And I'm not sure he did say it, because although the newspaper said he told it to Dr. Ricker, who was a dentist, and he made other comments to other people, he also belonged to the Elks Club, which was in Atlanta, and was a lot of Jewish people there. So I don't know, again, it's one of those things that could be, couldn't, I'm just passing it on to you all. Let's see. Okay. Now, this is the state's witness. The trial was in July of 1913. The state's witnesses were Montine Stowe, with a young girl who said that she came up there about 12:15, 12:20, never saw Leo Frank sitting there at the desk. The theory was that if he wasn't at the desk, he was somewhere else, possibly with Mary Phagan. George Epps. George Epps was a young man, I think he was 14 years old, that said that he rode the streetcar that morning of April 26, 1913, with Mary Phagan. And that while he was on the streetcar with Mary Phagan, she told him that Leo Frank flirted with her, that Leo Frank winked at her. And she was concerned and wanted him to escort her into the building when she went to get her pay. That was his testimony. He also testified that prior to the trial at a coroner's inquest, barefoot, he was basically the self-proclaimed boyfriend of Mary Phagan. I want you to know, though, after the trial, he said that he never met, he had never had any conversation at all with Mary Phagan. But that's what he testified to at the trial. Jim Connolly. Jim Connolly was the porter, the sweeper, the janitor of the National Pencil Factory. Jim Connolly gave a few different statements to the police. He said, one, he saw Mary Phagan in 12:56. But more importantly, his real first statement was he wasn't there at the pencil factory, and he was drunk. And he could not read, nor could he write. The second time he made the statement to the police, he said, all right, I was there, but I was drunk. And I did write the notes, but I wrote them at the direction of Leo Frank. And I wrote them on the Friday night before the Saturday. The third time he spoke to the police, he said, I was there, and when I was there, I saw Leo Frank holding the body of Mary Phagan. She had a rope around her neck, she was dead, and I helped Leo Frank take the body from the second floor to the basement via the elevator. So those things that he said. He also said that Leo Frank paid him $200. Now, one of the books basically says that the reason he was paid $200 was to burn the body in the furnace. But when the police said to him, "Where's the $200?" he said, "Leo took it back." And he never had the $200. He also said that he saw the silver mesh purse that Mary Phagan had carried with her on the desk of Leo Frank, and that Leo put it in the safe. Now, during the trial, a man by the name of C. Brutus Dalton testified. C. Brutus Dalton was a petty thief. He had been on the chain gang. But he testified that he would have factory seductions in the basement of the pencil factory with Leo Frank. That they would bring women down there. And that this was something that they did regularly. Or at least according to him. 14 people testified after Mr. Dalton that Mr. Dalton was a person of good character and truthful testimony. After the trial, Mr. Dalton said, "I've never met Leo Frank. I have no idea who Leo Frank is. But I did use the basement for assignations, and I used to tip Jim Connolly 25 cents. Helen Ferguson claimed that she asked Leo Frank for Mary Phagan's pay the Friday afternoon before the killing. And that Leo said, "No, Mary's coming tomorrow, I'll pay her then." It came to pass that Helen Ferguson actually was paid, had been paid previously by a man by the name of Henry Schiff, and had never gotten the money from Mary Phagan. Now remember, this is 1913. Nellie Pettis testified that Leo winked at her. Miss Donovan testified that Leo would smile. Nellie Wood said that he touched her breast. Miss Jackson and Miss Kitchen said that he would leer at them as they went into the bathroom. And Miss Robinson and Dewey Howell, the young lady came from Ohio, from the home of unwed mothers, their testimony was that Leo Frank referred to Mary Phagan as Mary. Again, this was 1913. Now, I want you to notice that this is a picture of Leo Frank and his wife, Lucille. And during the trial, Leo had 8 lawyers sitting with him. Lucille sat there very well dressed with a hat, wore white gloves. His mother sat next to them, also very well dressed with white gloves. Sitting at the prosecution table was Fanny, Phagan, Benton, Coleman, the mother of Mary Phagan, wearing a house dress. And there was only 3 lawyers. This is the picture of the courtroom. Actually, the trial was not in the courtroom. It was in the Atlanta City Hall. And during this period of time, they had, I doubt if you can see clearly, but there's over here and over here, they had what was called ozonators. They're the forerunner to air conditioners. It was 91 degrees in the courtroom, or in City Hall. And what happened was, the ozonators were making so much noise that Judge Leonard Rome said, "You know what? Shut them down. Open the windows." You see Judge Rome, this is Jim Connolly testifying. This is Hugh Dorsey, the prosecutor. During the trial, when Jim Connolly was testifying, he was testifying to things such as some sexual things. He talked about the fact that he had seen Leo Frank with his head up a woman's dress. He talked about stomps and whistles, whereby Leo had a routine with Mr. Connolly, whereby when a woman would come to the factory, he would stomp his foot. That was the indication for Mr. Connolly to lock the doors so the woman couldn't get out. And then after a while, when he would whistle, that was the indication to open the door. As a result of this type of testimony, Judge Rome told all the women and children to leave the courtroom. Now, they served sandwiches during this period of time, but all the women, that's why you see only men in the courtroom. And also, when the windows were open, well, there was crowds outside. And again, depending upon the books you read, some of the books say that the crowds were yelling, "Hang the Jew," or "We'll hang you." Again, it was just, there's a man by the name of Sam Epplin who's cited in the book The Provincials by Eli Evans that says that when the jurors would be walking from the courtroom to the hotel at night, people standing around would actually yell, "Hang the Jew," to the jurors as they were walking to the hotel. This is a picture of Jim Connolly. I got to point it over here. The morning of April 26, 1913, he defecated in the elevator shaft. That is a very important fact that we'll talk about later. He had written letters to Annie Ward Carter, who was, I don't want to say a girlfriend, but a woman that he wrote letters to. There was a lady named Lorraine that he was playing with his girlfriend. In the letters that he would write, he used the words "did" and "negro." Hugh Dorsey was the prosecutor of the case. He was firmly convinced that this was not the writing of Jim Connolly, that Jim Connolly would have used the word "did," rather "done," and the N-word instead of these words. And he was so convinced of that he hired Albert Osborne, who was the handwriting analysis for the Lindbergh child kidnapping case. And Osborne basically said that the notes were written by somebody who was semi-illiterate. But again, in the letters to Annie Ward Carter, this is what it said, and in the notes that were written, that were found next to the body, also, it said "did" and "negro." It didn't say "done" and the N-word. He had admitted killing Mary Phagan. His lawyer was a man by the name of William Smith. William Smith was hired by the Georgian newspaper to represent Jim Connolly, and Connolly told him that he killed Mary Phagan. He said that he killed her, brought her down to the basement, and then he passed out. He also had said that, and in the past, he would try to get money from Mary Phagan, who was another employee at the pencil factory, and when Mary Phagan asked him about the case, he said, "Leo's innocent." He also said he killed somebody to William Mincy. William Mincy was an insurance agent. In those days, it was very common for insurance agents to sell nickel and dime policies. They would go around to various neighborhoods and just solicit business. William Mincy was going through the neighborhood, and he went up to Jim Connolly and started soliciting him to buy insurance. And Jim Connolly's comment was, "I've already killed one person today, don't make me kill another." Unfortunately, William Mincy never was put on the stand to testify because his lawyers didn't think he would be subject to cross-examination. He was tried for accessory after the fact of murder, and Hugh Dorsey said if it didn't demand a conviction, he would let him go. The jury was out a whole 3 minutes. The only witness in the case was a guy named William Giesling, who was the undertaker, who testified that the hair on the lathe that was found and the hair that was taken from Mary Phagan's body could have been the same because even though they were different, because the undertaker used pine tar soap, it would have changed the texture and possibly color of the hair. Now, what that had to do with after the fact, I don't know, but that was the only witness they had. Let's see. All right, this was the defense. Oops, went too far. Okay. Connolly was on the witness stand 16 hours under cross-examination and never was shaken from his testimony. He said while he was on the stand, he said Leo made the comment, "Why should I have him? I have wealthy people in Brooklyn." He also said that Leo told him that Leo wanted to be with the little girl. When she refused him, he struck her. A lot of people think that there has to be some foundation to the testimony and the statements of William Connolly, that he could not have withstood 16 hours of cross-examination without folding. And they feel there had to be some basis to it for him to keep it up. The lawyers, though, very poor. Even though they were considered the best lawyers around, in my impression, I think they did that great job, the hair. They did 2 autopsies on Mary Phagan. The first one was after she was buried for 9 days. They went in and they examined her stomach for biscuits. They found biscuits and cabbage. They were trying to determine a timeline of when she passed away. The second time they did an autopsy was for her hair. A man by the name of Barrett found a piece of hair on the lathe, and they were trying to match it up and say it was her hair, and that the lathe on the second floor was what caused the hole in the side of the head. Dr. Henry Harris examined the hair. He told Hugh Dorsey the hair did not match. Hugh Dorsey said, other people said that it's hers, so I'm going to go with that. The blood. A man by the name of Jim Duffy said that he bled by the lathe. So there was some blood on the floor. They brought in a man by the name of Claude Smith, who said the blood could have come from a mouse. The notes, there was very little testimony or examination about the notes that were found. There was a bite mark on the back of Mary Phagan's body. There was no testimony at all or cross-examination regarding the excrement, which we'll talk about. When the police got there, they broke down the basement door that had fingerprints on it. They lost the door. We've talked about stomps and whistles. We've talked about the fact that there was testimony that Jim Connolly saw him with his head up, a woman's dress while she was on the table. Leo made the comment, "I'm not built like other men." So as a result, am I in your way? So as a result, they brought in Dr. Hancock. Dr. Hancock testified that Leo Frank had been circumcised. The witnesses in the case. There were 169 witnesses testified for Leo Frank. Most of them were Atlanta Jews. A lot of them testified that they knew through the B'nai B'rith or the Hebrew orphans. They brought in Northern Jews from Cornell University, doctors, lawyers, people who went to school with them. Yontif. Yontif is a Yiddish word meaning good holiday. When Mrs. Frank, Leo's mother, was on the witness stand, Hugh Dorsey handed her an envelope that said good Yontif on it. It was a letter that Leo had written to his uncle Moses Frank that had the financial information of the business, and on the envelope he wrote good Yontif, good holiday. They made a big to-do over the fact, again, that he was Jewish. Leo made an unsworn statement. In 1915, a person did not have to give a sworn statement. A person could say, "Judge, I want to make an unsworn statement to the jury," which meant that they were not allowed to be cross-examined. Leo spoke for 4 hours, and in that 4-hour period of time, he talked about bills of lading, he talked about invoices, he talked about managing the business and being the superintendent. At the very end, he basically just said, "I know nothing of the death of Mary Phagan," and that was all he said. They had a man by the name of J. Ashley Jones, who was an insurance agent for Leo Frank, on the witness stand. Hugh Dorsey asked questions such as, "Have you heard Leo Frank paying women for services? Or have you heard Leo Frank touching women's breasts?" He said no. And at that point, Leo Frank's mother stood up and said, "No, and you haven't either, you Gentile dog." That didn't help him either. This is Hugh Dorsey. Hugh Dorsey was the Solicitor General. He spoke for 6 hours on Saturday and 3 hours on Monday morning. And on Monday, as he spoke, and he said, "Guilty, guilty, guilty," the church bells from the Church of Immaculate Conception would ring. So it would be guilty, ring, guilty, ring, guilty, ring. Very dramatic. Luther Rosser was the lawyer who came to the police station when Leo was first arrested. They referred to him as a robust country boy. They said he asked no favors, he gave no board, he battled everybody. Interestingly enough, when he first came into the case, Leo was at the police station. He was being, according to Luther Rassa, Leo was being bullied by Chief Langford, who was the police chief. And Luther Rassa demanded that he be allowed in there to assist Leo Frank in whatever they were doing. He also demanded that Leo Frank be examined, because if there was a struggle with Mary Phagan, there would be some scratches, or his body or his clothes would have been ripped. He demanded a lot of things. He may have set the tone for the case. A matter of fact, William Smith, the lawyer for Jim Connolly, later on, years later, said, had Reuben Arnold, who was the second lawyer that Leo Frank hired, been the first lawyer to come to the police station, Leo Frank probably would have never been charged. Now, this is what they said about Solicitor Dorsey, that he was seeking self-aggrandizement in his ruthless effort to make a case where he knew beforehand there was no case. Now, between 1913 and 1909, between 1909 and 1913, there had been 17 African-American women killed in Atlanta. They were all mutilated, they all had their throats cut, they all happened on a Saturday. They called them the Jack the Ripper case. The first person they arrested for these crimes was a man named Lord Henry Huff. Henry Huff was tried and he was acquitted. The second person they arrested was a man named Lawton Brown. Lawton Brown confessed to killing these women. They tried him. He confessed again. Jury acquitted him. So, Dorsey had already lost 2 murder cases. Now, remember George Epps, the self-proclaimed boyfriend of Mary Phagan? He claimed now that the cops had forced him to testify in a certain way. The handwriting expert that Dorsey hired never testified, because I guess Dorsey didn't like what he was going to say. Depending upon which book, in The Dead Shall Rise, the grand jury wanted to indict Leo Frank and Jim Connolly. In the book, The Murder of Little Mary Phagan, they wanted to indict Leo Frank and Newt Lee. Solicitor Dorsey went to the grand jury and pled with them not to indict anybody but Leo Frank, because if they indicted anybody but him, it would hurt his case against Leo Frank. The hair on the lathe, again, he was told it wasn't her hair. He said others swore it was. He didn't rely on scientific evidence. He didn't rely on Dr. Harris. He wanted the jury to hear about the hair. We talked about the cops holding Minola McKnight until she made a statement they liked. Then she recanted it. She repudiated it. They still used it. And again, we talked about the uniformity being applied with alcohol by police. Now, the reason I have this up here is a lot of people say that, oh, there was a lot of anti-Semitism during the trial. Well, there were 5 Jewish people on the grand jury that died with Leo Frank, according to this book. This was the judge, Judge Rome. Judge Rome, after the trial, said, I am not thoroughly convinced that Frank is guilty or innocent. In regard to the crowd that was outside, that was yelling, hang the Jew, and other comments, he said if Christ and all his angels came to show this man innocent, they would still vote him guilty. Apparently, and I learned this the other night from listening to Steve Arney, there was a man sitting up in a tree level with the courthouse, with the windows. And as questions were being asked, he would relate the question to the crowd. The crowd would either yay or boo or what have you. When the judge was writing his charge, the law that he gives to the jury, there was another judge by the name of Judge Powell, Arthur Powell, who was sitting with him while the judge was doing this. And Judge Rome made a comment regarding Leo Frank that this man's innocence is proven to a mathematical certainty. After the jury found him guilty, they tried to poll the juror. This is where the judge asked for each individual juror if that was their verdict in the jury room, is it still their verdict? But there was so much noise going on, and there was so much loud comments going on, the judge couldn't do it. So he had to stop it. Newt Lee was let out of jail. Newt Lee, who was a night watchman, he spent from April 27th to the end of July in jail at his lawyer's request, because his lawyer was afraid that if Newt Lee was out on the street, people might kill him. And Leo Frank was sentenced to hang on October 10th, 1913. Now, during this period of time, Fiddlin' John Carson was a very renowned musician, and he came up with a song called The Ballad of Mary Phagan. And I'll tell you, this is the ballad. I've spent a lot of time on eBay buying various documentation, newspaper clippings, newspapers from 1913, 1915. And I really wanted to get this album. And I finally found it on eBay, and I bought it. It was a 78 vinyl record. And I was thrilled. I couldn't wait to get it. Finally came in the mail, and I realized I didn't have a phonograph to play it on. So I had to go out and buy a phonograph, and Chris Stern is going to help me play it. found guilty, he's been sentenced to hang, and what happens is it's decided that they need to bring in some big guns. Rabbi Marks from Atlanta, he decides, he goes up north, and he gets Lewis Marshall, the president of the American Jewish Committee, Adolph Ox, the publisher of the New York Times, advertising exec, Lasker, and these people, including Henry Ford, to help Leo Frank. And I'm a little leery about Henry Ford, because I thought he was anti-Semitic, but they list him as one of the people that was on Leo's side. Now, one of the things that was of concern, Leo was not in court when the verdict was rendered. What happened was Judge Rome was concerned that if he was acquitted, the crowd would come in and kill him. So he cut a deal with the lawyers that Leo Frank or his lawyers would not be in the courtroom when the verdict was read. The lawyers also told the solicitor, Solicitor Dorsey, that they would agree not to make that an appellate issue, that Leo should be in court, or should have been in court, during the period of time when the verdict was issued, because it's a critical stage of the case. So what happened was, new lawyers come into the case. And the new lawyers write a 115-page appellate brief to go to the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court rather, and again, they take the position that it's not something that they want to hear because the lawyers waived it, basically. Let's see. There we go. This is just a picture of the people involved. I put a little demarcation line here because I wasn't sure, but books say he was involved. The Supreme Court basically heard the case. They alleged the due process should have been raised earlier instead of waiting till it got to the Supreme Court. It should have been in the motion for new trial. The habeas corpus, to produce the body in court, was denied. And this is an interesting quote from the Muskogee Democrat. It said, "The sad part is all that Frank has failed to get a new trial, not because the higher court believed him to be guilty, but because of technical mistakes made by his lawyer." Now, what happened was, after the appeal was denied, it was decided that they were going to go in front of the Parole Board, or the Prison Commission, to see if they could get the sentence commuted. And what happened was, these are the people who actually went in front of the board for Leo. These are the people who were opposed to it. Herbert Clay was a Solicitor General for the Blue Ridge Circuit. John Tucker Dorsey was a legislator. He was also the chairman of the Penal Commission. Fred Marsh was a local attorney. He had the mayor of Marietta. Bowling Glover Brumby from the Brumby factory. He had the ordinary or the probate court judge, former sheriff, and of course Elmer Phagan, the uncle. Leo's attitude was he was innocent and he wanted justice, and he wanted out. Now, during this period of time, though, Tom Watson was raising a lot of problems for Leo Frank. Tom Watson was a Democrat who renounced the Democratic Party, became a populist. In 1896, he ran for Vice President of the United States with William Jennings Bryan. In 1906, he became a Klansman. He had two papers. He had the Jeffersonian, which was a weekly paper, and he had Watson's Magazine, which was a monthly paper. In the Jeffersonian, he would write things such as, Mary Phagan was pursued to her hideous death, by a hideous sodomite. Mary Phagan was pursued to her death by a perverted Jew from New York. As a result, the newspaper, the Jeffersonian, went from a circulation of 25,000 to 87,000 readers. He also said that if the governor commutes the sentence, it'll be the bloodiest riot ever in the South. Tom Watson, that's why I wrote this, he wielded a pen that was warmed up in hell. He basically advocated the lynching of Leo Frank. As a result, Governor Slayton did, in fact, commute the sentence. And this, as a result of him commuting the sentence, They hung him in effigy in various parts of the state. He was referred to as King of the Jews. He lived over on Ansley Park somewhere, and which is, I think, at the corner of West Paces Ferry and I think it's called Slayton Road. 75 men with firearms, blackjacks, and dynamite. They went to his house. They went to get him. There was also talk that Slayton was paid $1 million by the Jews of America to commute the sentence. Some of the reasons that he used for commuting the sentence, he spent 12 days reviewing the transcript, which, by the way, is gone. There is no transcript anymore. It's gone. But he reviewed the transcript. He went to the pencil factory. He did his own. He had hearings where he interviewed people, and he determined that Jim Connolly was the depraved and lecherous Negroes ever lived in Georgia. He didn't believe anything Connolly said because of the various inconsistencies in his story. He didn't believe that the hair that was found on the leg belonged to Mary Phagan or the blood next to the leg. During the first time that Jim Connolly spoke, he said that they wrapped the body in crocus sack. At trial, he said they wrapped it in bed tick. There was no bed tick in the pencil factory. The notes were found down in the basement. They were on the pads of H.F. Becker, who worked there from 1908 to 1912. Because the pads were down there, because Mary Phagan had grime and cinders from the basement, the governor was convinced that Mary Phagan had met her death in the basement. Now, you remember the notes. He talked about the night witch. Everybody thought, well, maybe that he was referring to the night watchman did it. Well, the governor realized that the night witch is actually a Southern Negro superstition. It means that if a child is crying at night and you don't go in there and wake the child up, they're going to be dead in the morning with a rope around their neck. And the governor believed that how would a man from Brooklyn, New York, know about a Southern Negro superstition, let alone anything about night witches? But more importantly, remember I told you that on April 26th of 1913, Jim Connolly defecated in the elevator shaft. Then he said that he used the elevator with Leo Frank to take the body to the basement. Well, when the elevator was used, when it hit the floor, it hit it flush. And anything that was under the elevator would have been smashed. Well, when the police got there, though, that morning, the excrement was still in its formed original condition. So the governor was firmly convinced that Connolly hadn't used the elevator to go to the basement. The governor believed that what happened was when Mary Phagan got paid, Connolly attacked her, took her money, threw her down a hatch that was in the floor of the pencil factory into the basement. Also, they found the pay envelope for Mary Phagan about 8 feet from where Connolly usually sits. Now, what happened was, after the governor commuted the sentence, there was a group of people that got together to plan a lynching of Leo Frank. And these were the leaders. Herbert Clay was the Solicitor General, John Tucker Dorsey, former Governor Joseph Brown, who said, "Oh, we understand that anybody except the Jew can be punished for a crime." And there was Judge Newton Augustus Morris. These were the leaders who took the position that unless it was their own authority, their prospect of outraging the whole of jury and yanking them was a law to them. These were the lieutenants, George Daniel, James Gann, who was a county ordinary, and Newton Mays Morris, who was also known as Black Newt, also known as Whipping Newt, because he had a whip that he would wear around his shoulder, and he ran the Cobb County prison camp. And these were the supporters. And I want you can see all the names here, the mayor, sheriffs. I want you to remember the name Robert Hill, who was the banker. Interesting enough, Yellow Jacket Brown. Yellow Jacket Brown is not referred to in any of the books by a first name. I spent a lot of time in the probate court, and I found out his name is Jim Brown, and I actually met his granddaughter. Yellow Jacket Brown was the man who rode a motorcycle from Marietta to Milledgeville and cut the phone lines at the prison, so nobody could call anybody. When I asked the granddaughter if she could give me a picture of Yellow Jacket Brown, she gave me a picture of him on the telephone pole. So I was interested. So these are the folks involved. This is the lynching on August 17th, which actually was 100 years ago yesterday. William Crean was a two-time convicted killer who was serving time with Leo Frank. He decided that it would be a noble deed for him to kill Leo Frank. So he snuck into the bunk of Leo Frank and cut him from his left ear to his Adam's apple with what the Jeffersonian said, a hard knife, because again it would be not kosher, because it was used on the hard. After the abduction, the newspaper said these were the best citizens, that there was no riffraff. What happened was Judge Morris, who up until 2003, when Steve Oney's book came out, Judge Morris was always portrayed as the man who got Leo Frank's body down from the hanging, took the body to the funeral home, and made sure the body went back to his mother up in Brooklyn. When Steve Oney's book came out in 2003, it portrayed Judge Morris a little differently, and Judge Morris was the one who said, Mr. Frank, we're now going to do what the law said to do, is hang you by the neck until dead. And Leo's response was, I think more of my life and my mother than I do my own life. And they hung him. And he stayed up there for a few hours while thousands of people ended up coming to see him while he was hanging from the tree. There's another picture of him. Now, after he was lynched, there was a grand jury formed to determine who did it. Woody Allen said, mockery of a fraud of a sham, and that's what it was. Herbert Clay was the chief prosecuting officer. He found out that James Anderson, who was the foreman of the grand jury, was opposed to lynching. So he got him off of the grand jury and he appointed Robert Hill, who was the banker, was part of the supporters. Bowling Glove Brumby was there. Luther Haynes was a Superior Court judge here in Cobb County. And Luther Haynes told me, and it's in the books, that 7 members of the lynch mob were on the grand jury. Governor Harris, who now had taken over from Governor Slayton, appointed Herbert Clay to investigate the case, but the grand jury determined there was no identification and there was insufficient evidence to indict anybody. But they thanked Herbert Clay for his active participation. He was the leader. So sure he was doing his job. And again, another Brumby was the clerk of the court at that time. Now, in 1923, there was a federal penitentiary prisoner. His name was Freeman. That's all we know about him. And although it became public in 1923, actually information had been given to Governor Slayton in 1950 that Freeman was playing cards with Jim Connolly in the basement of the pencil factory. And that Jim Connolly stood up and saw Mary Phagan or saw somebody and said, and went up to the first level of the pencil factory and started to struggle with this person. Freeman left through the back door. Later that day, Jim Connolly came to Freeman and said, I need $3. I want to borrow $1.20, or rather $1.80. And when Freeman gave him the $1.80 in return, Connolly gave him a silver mitch purse. Now, in 1982, Alonzo Mann, who was from Tennessee, came forward. And he came forward with some very fascinating information. He said that in 1913 he was a 14-year-old boy and he worked at the pencil factory. And that he went to the pencil factory that Saturday and he saw Jim Connolly holding the body of Mary Phagan. And Jim Connolly said, if you ever tell anybody what you saw, I'll kill you. So he went home and he told his mother. And his mother said, you keep your mouth shut. Well, in 1982, he was suffering from a very bad heart condition. He decided he needed, I guess, to get this off his chest. And based on his statement, based on a lot of other information that we've talked about, based on the representations of some very powerful Atlanta lawyers, Dale Schwartz and Charles Wittenstein, who's passed on, the Pardon and Parole Board basically said, without addressing the question of guilt or innocence, and in recognition of the state's failure to protect the person of Leo Frank and preserve his opportunity to continue his appeal of his conviction, and in recognition of the state's failure to bring his killers to justice and to heal all wounds, the state grants pardon and parole, grants Leo Frank a pardon. So they never said that he was innocent. They're just saying because they didn't allow, he wasn't kept alive to appeal his case. And then in 1995, Rabbi LeBeau of Temple Columbus, he put up a plaque that said, wrongly accused, falsely convicted, wantonly murdered, at the site where Leo Frank was hung. There was a building there that's not there anymore. This is just a timeline of the events. The grave of Mary Phagan is out at the cemetery there. This part here, the bed, so to speak, of the grave was written by Tom Watson. Lucille Frank. Lucille Frank was seen by Dr. James Kaufman. Now, he was our internist. And he would say that when he would think of depression, he would think of Lucille. He said that Leo Frank may have been killed, but she's the one who served a life sentence. She worked at J.P. Allen in the glove department. And one day, Mrs. Slayton came in. And she went up to Mrs. Slayton and said, I think we should know each other. My name is Mrs. Leo Frank. She died in 1957. And when she died, they found Leo Frank's ring and various letters. When Leo was hung, he asked that his ring be given back to Lucille. So they gave his ring to, there was a man by the name of O.C. Keeler, who was a writer, I think, for either the NBJ or the Journal, and he got the ring back to her. She wanted to be cremated, and she was in fact cremated, but there was an ordinance in Atlanta that says that you could not put the cremains of a person on parks, and that's where she wanted to be, her cremains to be spread around. So as a result, they stayed on the shelf at the Patterson Funeral Home for a number of years. And actually, for 5 years, they stayed there 5 to 6 years. And then finally what happened was they called up her nephews, Alan and Harold Marcus, in 1964, or 1962, 1963, and said, listen, come and get, your aunt's ashes here. We're renovating, we need to get rid of them. And they put it in their Volkswagen, the trunk of their Volkswagen. And the question was, well, now what do we do with it? They didn't want to stir up a big controversy, so they ended up taking her ashes down to Oakland Cemetery. And they buried her between her parents' graves. She's buried right here. There's no mark or anything. This is just a little story I'll tell you. You're familiar with Wild Man Gent Myers up in Kennesaw? A few years ago, my wife and I were going through somewhere, and I said, while we're going through Kennesaw, let's stop. Maybe he's got some paraphernalia, something about the Mary Phagan, Leo Frank case. And I went in there with my wife and asked him if he did have something. He said, no, he didn't have anything. And then he said, but there's some Jew boy in Atlanta who's got the handcuffs. Well, my wife took a few steps back, and I took a few steps forward, and I said, I'm a Jew boy. And he and I became best friends. And he actually has, let me see here, a tremendous collection of Mary Phagan books and Leo Frank books. He is a very educated individual. And he, after we spoke, he took me upstairs to the second level of his business and showed me this safe. It's not a safe, it's just like a cabinet that he keeps things that his grandmother had kept for him during that period of time. I offered to buy it from him, he wouldn't sell it, but he was kind enough to allow me to make copies of things, copies of the records of cemetery, people in cemeteries, and he was just gave me a lot of information that I didn't otherwise have. So I was very fortunate to meet him. Let's see. In 2008, they put up a marker where Leo Frank was hung on Roswell Road. At that time, we had Doug Stone over there, Governor Barnes, Steve Thompson was there. The marker is no longer there now because they're doing various construction over there. And this is the marker, which basically talks about the fact that Governor Slayton commuted the sentence and again without addressing guilt or innocence, but in recognition of the state's failure to protect Leo Frank, he was granted a hospice pardon. So, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll hang around for a while. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Yes, sir.
I have two.
Okay.
It seems to me that it's a premise that Leo Frank, that Leo Frank had sexually assaulted Mary because of the testimony of other people.
Yes, sir.
Was she in fact sexually assaulted?
According to the doctor, she was not.
Second question or statement is that was the hatred of Jews at that time so bad that it actually was worse than the dislike for black people? Because I understand that if a black man just looks at a white woman wrong, he gets hung.
Well, I can't answer really for all that it is. I can tell you what the books suggest. The books suggest that Leo Frank was a Yankee industrialist, whereas Jim Connolly was a local individual. So they gave more credit to Jim Connolly than to the Yankee industrialist. Yes, sir.
As a former prosecutor, how would you have handled that case?
I don't know if there was a case. You know, to be very honest with you. I mean, the hair didn't match on the leg, the blood didn't match. You had somebody who had given multiple contradictory statements. I don't know if it would have ever gotten into a courtroom, to be very candid with you. Yes, sir.
The legal climate today is different than what they had back then. As a man who's experienced today's climate, with judicial and regulatory, everything surrounding the courts, what was different back then that may have led to, obviously forensics is different. We don't have the wealth of scientific knowledge or tools and equipment to identify hair and blood and things like that. But looking back into that legal climate and regulatory age, what might have inhibited proper prosecution or a better defense
Well,
or better
I'm sorry.
justice? No, please.
Well, I think a big thing dealt with the fact that lawyers didn't get into the question of the estimate. I mean, that's not something the governor found in the course of his review of the case. So I think that was a very significant feature that was never discussed during the trial, as I understand it. So that's one thing. You brought up a very good point, forensics. Today, everything is forensics in the trial. There was none at that point. Matter of fact, there's in one of the books, it talks about the fact there was a man by the name of William Green. No, I'm sorry, not William Green. I'm sorry. Mr. Holloway. Holloway was a day watchman who had observed Jim Connolly washing what appeared to be bloodstains out of the shirt after the killing. When police got there, they summarily decided it wasn't blood and just gave him back the shirt. So, you know, that would have been looked at a lot differently. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not so concerned about who killed Mary Phagan. I'm more concerned about this group mentality that took over the neighbors here in Marietta who decided to go down and get him. This didn't take a day to plan. This took a long time to plan, to go down and then hang him. I think that's really, really more serious than the murder of Mary Phagan.
Well, you know, we have to always be mindful of Mary Phagan in the sense that he was a young lady who had a very short-lived life. She met a very tragic death. So we have to realize that she also was a victim and have to consider that. But the death of Leo Frank was vigilante justice. Now,
Do you think it could happen again, something similar?
I'd like to think not. But, yes, ma'am.
I think you mentioned the purse was supposedly, the mesh purse was in the safe, then it was given to the friend. Where did it ever turn up, or did it? Never?
I don't know.
Never?
Yes, sir.
I'm kind of struck by it. It seems like Leo was silent, and then he just kind of made these broad statements. He had the 8 lawyers, and his mother's statement made it seem like he's very convinced of the justice system and that they would kind of take care of him. Like, how would you, as a lawyer, I know we're rewriting history, but it seems like he didn't present his humanity, and so he was,
Well,
would you have coached him differently if you were his lawyer to, like, recognize that, you know?
Well, you know, Tom Watson Brown, who was the great-grandson of Tom Watson, he told me, and he was a firm believer that Leo Frank was guilty. He believed Leo Frank was guilty because Leo Frank would not take the witness stand and be cross-examined. So that may be, you know, one of the problems that came up. Yes, sir.
If the purse was never found, I guess that was just an example you had on the screen earlier.
Sorry?
If the purse was never found, I guess that was just an example.
Oh,
you
yeah,
had on the
yeah, that's
screen.
just a picture I found on the internet, yeah. Yes, sir.
Following the question in the back here, at Steve Oney's presentation on past Thursday, it struck me that the people who planned this learned 2 things from Andrew's raid. One being cut communications, and number 2, the failure of Andrew's raid to eliminate the possibility of pursuit, because obviously they were caught. So it seems like the planning of this was to eliminate the possibility of pursuit by damaging any vehicles along their route that could be used to pursue them. So, and at that point, Andrew's raid was only 50 years, and I'm sure everyone in Marietta had heard that story over and over and over again. And it just seems like they picked up those 2 features of Andrew's raid in particular as part of their planning.
Yes, sir.
Van, you said something about Wild Man told you that the handcuffs were with a Jew and Illinois.
That's what he said. Let me just clarify that. I have a pair of handcuffs that Jim Berry, who's a lawyer in town, gave me that he claimed his father had received from the sheriff at that time. There's actually a man by the name of Mickey Brand, who lives in Marietta, that has a pair of handcuffs that, based on the story he tells me, I think has a close connection. Now, in all honesty, the other night I gave the speech, and if you remember, there was the name Luther and Emmett Burton were 2 of the individuals that were on the list. And actually, Leo Frank, on the trip back from Millersville, sat between the Burton brothers. Emmett Burton was in the audience, and he announced that he had the handcuffs. So I'm not claiming I have the handcuffs. I'm claiming that based on the other 2 individuals, that there's probably a much closer connection to the actual handcuffs.
There were probably a lot of people that claimed they had handcuffs.
Well, it's kind of like people, a lot of people claim they had a piece of the rope. And I can honestly tell you that I've heard, I've had, what's the saying goes, that if everybody had a piece of the rope, it would go from, Atlanta to California. In one of my speeches, I met the granddaughter of Jarrell DeVesty Benton, who was the grandfather of Mary Phagan. And she told me that she had a piece of the rope. And I thought, well, maybe she does. So I went to a house off of West Paces Fair Road, and in an old Bible, there was a piece of rope, maybe, as big as my pinky. And the Bible, though, the page that was on turned brown. So it's possible that it may have been a piece of the rope.
You didn't mention about Jim Connolly's attorney, I don't think.
William Smith.
And what he did upon his death.
Well, two things. William Smith was a hero. In 1914, after the motion for new trial was denied, William Smith, who represented Jim Connolly, went to Judge Roman and said, listen, Jim Connolly confessed to killing Mary Phagan. You need to give him a new trial. Or that's what he was implying. It didn't happen. But in February of 1949, when William Smith was laying in Crawford Lawn Hospital dying, he wrote out in block letters the statement that said, in articles of death, I believe in the good character and innocence of Leo Frank. And the reason I said he was very courageous was the state bar didn't come up with the rules for lawyers until 1963. But one of those rules is that if whatever a client tells you is confidential, even after that relationship ends. And here, Mr. Smith went and gave up a confidential statement to try to keep a man alive. Yes, sir.
Once again, I've got a couple of questions. Perhaps I missed this in your presentation. But when the police arrive at the crime scene,
Yes, sir.
they're walking in cold. They've got all this evidence. What was the timeline between the time they got there and the time that they focused in on Leo Frank, and what was it that focused them on Leo Frank?
The timeline, as I understand, they found the body at 3 o'clock in the morning. They didn't get to Leo until sometime after the next morning. And what they focused on, he was when they took him to see the body, he was incredibly nervous. The first time he saw Mary Phagan's body, he said he didn't recognize her, then he said he did recognize her. The fact that he called the pencil factory at 7 o'clock that night and never did that before to find out if everything was all right. Those are just some of the things offhand that I can think of that led to them believing that he was there. Also, they put him and Newt Lee in a room together, and they eavesdropped. The detectives eavesdropped on the room, and they heard Leo say to Newt Lee, "If you keep up like this, we're both going to go to hell." So Leo made a few statements that didn't help him out, to be very candid.
My second question is, the note that's found at the body kind of disturbs me. Who wrote it, and what was the purpose?
Well, it's believed that Jim Connolly wrote it. And the purpose was to put the blame on the night witch for the long, tall, slim Negro who could have been Newt Lee, or the man down here, which was the fire stoker, which was William Lowe.
So was the idea, or his thinking, that they would think that Mary Phagan actually wrote that?
No, I think when he admitted that he wrote it, the plan was that the suspicion would fall on somebody other than Jim Connolly.
There were at least 3 Morrises involved in the kidnapping group, 2 Newts and Fred. And Steve only singled out Fred toward the end of his book as being the only one who had remorse for what he had done. And said that he would soon after the kidnapping. And yet Fred shows up on your list of folks who advocated against the pardon. And apparently it was still a pardon, and they never did that, but they spoke about the conspiracy because none of the conspirators did. What made Steve only think that Fred Morris was regretted?
I don't know. There were a few that, there's one I can think of, that went to Judge Manning, who was a Superior Court judge here, and I don't want to say confessed his sins, but he told them what happened. And Judge Manning then went to and told it to Bill Kinney. They said Bill Kinney found out on this, but I don't know specifically what Fred Morris.
I never understood why he seemed to acknowledge being different.
Just out of curiosity about yourself, how many books on the case did you read?
There's
And also, what in the beginning, how did you become interested in this case?
I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and the first time I heard about the case was probably in the 80s, when Bill Kinney gave a lecture at the synagogue about the Leo Frank case. And it just fascinated me. And I remember the first, there was only one or two books that Bill Kinney recommended that I read. There's really only about maybe a half a dozen books that specifically deal with the Leo Frank case. And you have other books that have a chapter in it about the case. The leading book used to be the Leo Frank case by Leonard Dynasty, which, by the way, they're selling in the store. Then Steve Oney came out with a book in 2003, which is, basically all-inclusive. And then there's a book called Murder Chronicles by R. Barry Flowers. It has a chapter in there. There's the book The Provincials by Eli Evans. It has some things in it. And I basically picked out from these books what interests me, and if it's contradictory to something else, to show, like I said, I'm not the cliff notes, that's about it. But there's lots of, I've read tremendous amounts of newspapers from 1913 to 1950 to kind of get an idea of the flavor that was going on at that time, and got some facts from those. But mostly, probably Oney's book is probably the most informative that I have. But I can tell you that I constantly go back to Oney's book, I go back to Dynasty's book, to Barry Flowers, whatever. Yes, sir.
I can only imagine what happened to the transcripts. I mean, you mentioned that they're gone.
It's gone.
Where in the timeline did it become evident that they were gone?
That I can't answer. I can tell you that I've gone down to Fulton County Superior Court, tried to get it, and of course it was not there. The closest that I have to it is, there used to be a lawyer in town who's passed on by the name of Kyle Yancey. And Kyle Yancey had the court reporter's notes. How he got them, I have no idea. And he gave them to me. And they were used, I think in 2008, there was a documentary that was produced by a man up in Boston. Yeah, I think it was. And I let him have the notes. And he used them for the course of the documentary. But where they are, I don't know. Yes, sir.
I may have missed it, but Connolly, when and how did he die?
He died in 1962. He had committed some more crimes. He had been shot in the course of a burglary, I believe. But nobody knows where he's buried. Yeah. I didn't know that until I heard it from Steve Oney the other night. Yes, ma'am.
These events and this time was the beginning of so many things nationally in America. The child labor laws, and those continue. We still battle with some of those today. The Anti-Defamation League, the resurgence of communication. From the legal perspective, especially in the state of Georgia, can you
stand, he talked about prior misconduct of Leo Frank, he talked about bad acts of Leo Frank. I don't think that would be allowed into evidence by any judge in today's courtroom.
You talked about, on the sworn statement,
Yes.
when did that no longer become?
Judge, do you have any idea when they stopped giving unsworn statements?
It was not all that long ago, Coleman guessing, but I think it was in the 60s or 70s.
He's a judge, huh?
So man, is Wild Man convinced that Connolly did it?
I never asked him.
Really?
I
How
never
about
asked-
Bill? Kenny?
Kenny, the last thing I read, there was an article recently, and he said that he doesn't know. It could be either way. And there's still a lot of people out there that firmly believe Leo did it.
What do you think?
I think Connolly did it.
Well, the way you presented it, it seems, and all, you know, it just seems to me that that's the case too. You think he'll get a pardon?
No. I think the Parole Board has done everything that they can do. In order to get a full pardon, there'd have to be something more than what they've already heard. I just don't see it happening. You talk about him being exonerated. I just don't see it. Yes, sir.
Well, when we were in high school a long time ago, up in the Twin Cities up north, a book about Mary Phagan was actually recommended to us for reading.
Yes, sir.
And it was by I believe it was a newspaper editor of a Jewish newspaper in Memphis named Harry. I think his first name was. It was called A Little Girl. And I haven't really run into the book, but it was, we read the diary of Anne Frank and To Kill a Mockingbird, the usual books when we were in high school.
Yeah.
But you haven't encountered that book then?
No, I sure haven't, sir. No.
He had a famous Jewish newspaper, maybe one of the few in the South.
I'll look into that.
I think his first name was Harry. He died a long time ago.
I'll look into it. I appreciate you sharing that.
It's Harry Golden.
Golden, yeah.
Well, Harry Golden.
Golden.
He wrote a book called Little Girl Dead.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've
Yes,
read
sir.
that book, yeah.
When was that written, sir?
After 1955.
55, yeah.
Because the first book about the case was written by a guy named Samuels called The Night Fell on Georgia. And it came out in 1955. And I went to a book dealer and had them track down the book. And the book, it was a paperback book. And it was only 45 cents back in 1955. And since they're taping this, I'm not going to tell you how much I paid because Mr. Cox may show it to my wife. I paid significantly more money than 45 cents for the book. But the reason I bought that was because I felt since it was so close in time, or as closest in time, there might be some information such as wording from the transcript in that book. So that's why I bought it. Yes, sir.
Have you done any work on the murder of Jean Benet Ramsey? That's not covered here, okay?
No.
Can you shed some light on the climate of the people of Marietta at this time when 15 people are so powerful and so intimidating that they're able to execute a lynching and there being no repercussions?
The people who were in charge at the time, the authority figures, were part of the lynch mob.
Right.
So,
But no one questioned what they did. No citizens,
No.
no one came forward, no one challenged.
well, that's why I said it was a mockery of a sham, the grand jury. No. As a matter of fact, Bill Kinney, who I tell everybody was dealing with this case, he said as a young man, basically nobody talked about it. It was just something you keep quiet.
I think around the state, you know, Cobb County is a, unit of its own, but I read a quote in the Macon Telegraph that said, they doubtless know who is responsible and is doubtful that those will be brought to justice. So other cities around the state weren't pleased that this had happened, but I think there was no mechanism. Because the grand jury was investigating itself.
There was a lot of repercussions. I know like Chicago said they would not extradite anybody back to Georgia. There were some merchants that would sell to Georgia. There was repercussions, about it. But as far as the individuals involved,
Our research come across any details about how the mob was able to get him out of prison so easy?
There's two theories. One theory is that they just went in there and got it. Because what they did was they handcuffed Warden Smith and Superintendent Burke. They cut Warden Smith's gas line to his car. And then they went and got Leo Frank, who was in the infirmary because his throat had been cut. And the theory was that they just went in there against the will of everybody and did this. However, before the kidnapping of Leo Frank, or the abduction of Leo Frank, John Tucker Dorsey, who was the chairman of the Penal Commission, he had gone down to the prison system in Milledgeville to inspect the sanitation condition. There's some theory that he went down there really as a scout, and more than just to inspect the sewer conditions, and maybe it was an inside job. Also, there's indication that subsequent to the abduction of Leo Frank, there was a grant that was given to the prison system by the state after this had done, after they got Leo out. So Steve Oney kind of commented about that the other night, that there was a lot of money possibly as a result of the prison system looking the other way. Yes, Mike?
10 years ago, the Bremen Museum in Atlanta had the first ever exhibit on Leo Frank and Mary Phagan, and the artifacts in it are amazingly, they're just amazing. Like the prison door from Milledgeville that apparently was left open, and baby clothes of Mary Phagan and baby clothes of Leo Frank. And I think that exhibit is going to be at the Kennesaw event. That whole exhibit is going there. And I would just mention that to people because you see these original artifacts. And there were a lot of parallels between, unseemingly, a lot of parallels between Mary Phagan's family and the Frank family. And when I first heard about the case, I heard that the Phagans were terribly poor people, that she was working in a factory because they didn't have enough money. That, apparently, some of that was not true. And if you look at that funeral picture of the Phagan family around Mary's grave, you see how they're dressed. These people were not poor people. And the reason I mention that is because Mary Phagan Keene, who lives here in Marietta, she told me that there weren't enough desks in the school. Schools had just enough desks for a certain number of kids. And Mary was sort of waiting to get into school. And this is why she was working in the pencil factory. And this is why a lot of the girls, now some of them were farm girls who came to the city because, that. But the other thing I want you to mention is how taboo this subject has been for 100 years, both on the Jewish side and on the side of the old Mariettas.
In the sense of just
never being discussed.
Well, that's what the Southern Museum of Kennesaw, the locomotive museum, they're doing the, I think they call it revisiting the Seeking Justice exhibit. I was up there Sunday night, and I agree with Michael, there's some fascinating objects. They have Leo Frank's desk, but the most fascinating to me is the door, the prison door, that's where the actual man got him out of. I highly recommend people go and see it. And the whole objective, though, of the Southern Museum doing this is to open a dialogue so that, therefore, people can discuss it, discuss the ramifications of it, and hopefully bring it to the forefront. So,